Hello, and welcome back to the Garrett Ashley Mullet Show. I've got a special treat, a little bit of something different for you in this episode. I found an interview with author and futurist Arthur C. Clarke from 1976. This was during an AT&T MIT conference 45 years ago. NotTheBee.com had it highlighted, and I think it's very interesting. I think it's something that we should take a look at, we should watch, because Arthur C. Clarke, he's got one of my favorite quotes. Any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. I think that's a fantastic and thought-provoking quote. Science fiction author, futurist, all-around interesting guy to listen to. I haven't watched this interview before, so we're going to watch it together. We're going to react to it, and we'll see what he says. We'll see if he correctly predicted, like so many popular mechanics covers from the 1950s, 60s, 70s. We'll see if he correctly predicted some of what it is that we have going on in our world today. Let's jump right in. Before we do, though, go ahead and hit subscribe, like this video, make sure to leave a comment at the end letting me know what you think. If I missed something, if I'm way out to lunch in some of my reactions, by all means, teach me something or let me know if I taught you a thing or two. Without further ado, here's Arthur C. Clarke from 1976.
We're talking today with Arthur Clarke, the man responsible for communication satellites. Mr. Clarke, you've said not too long ago that in terms of communications, we're still in the semaphore and smoke stage. Would you put that in context, please?
Well, as far as the home is concerned, we have TV and radio and telephone. The telephone is the only way we can communicate outside yet. We get a lot of communication inwards through the radio and TV, but we're going to get devices which will enable us to send much more information to our friends. They'll be able to see us, we'll be able to see them, we'll be able to exchange pictorial information, graphical information, data, books, and so forth.
What would the ideal communications device be in your eyes?
Well, it would be a high-definition TV screen and a typewriter keyboard, and through this you can exchange any type of information, send messages to your friends which they can read. They can wait when they get up. They can see what messages have come in the night. You can call in through this any information you want: airline flights, price of things at the supermarket, books you've always wanted to read. News, selectively, you could say, you'll tell the machine, I'm interested in such and such items, sports, politics, or so forth. And the machine will hunt the main central library and bring all this to you selectively, just what you want, not all the junk which you have to get.
So, all right, there's a lot here. And it's worth noting that 45 years ago, this seemed stranger than fiction. What he was describing as the future seemed stranger than fiction. And he wrote fiction. But what he was predicting, at least so far, he's spot on. 45 years on, 2 generations, depending on how long you count a generation. 2 generations on, kids, my kids, I have 7 with an 8th on the way. My kids don't know of a different world. They don't know of a world in which when you want to watch the news, you turn on CBS. Maybe you get ABC, maybe you get good reception, maybe you don't in your market, maybe you get NBC, but you get a couple of main news stations and that's it. What they tell you, what Dan Rather or Walter Cronkite tells you, that's what it is. They're the most trusted men in America. They are journalism. You read the newspaper, that's what you get, and you don't throw a fit. What he's describing is a foregone conclusion to people in our day, but 45 short years ago, this was a strange, wonderful world to look forward to that we hadn't quite seen, and some of us could barely even imagine. It seemed strange and wonderful, and yet here we are. You're watching me watch a interview from 45 years ago, from 10 years before I was born. this video was recorded. That was just not possible at the time. That's only been possible for a few short years. When I was a kid, this was not a thing that somebody in my position could do. Somebody in my position as a blue-collar I&D technician for an oil and gas company in northeastern Colorado with a stay-at-home wife, homeschooling his 7 kids with an 8th on the way. A man in my position was not able to sit down and watch and react to a interview with Arthur C. Clarke. Just couldn't do it. Now, I might have my best friends over, some family members over, and we might watch the news together. We might be hanging out on a Friday evening when some important news came out, or we might know that the space shuttle was going to launch into outer space. We might all have a party to watch this thing together and talk about it amongst ourselves, but we certainly could not do the sorts of things he's describing until relatively recently. And yet, he saw these things coming, and he was part of making these things come about. By articulating these ideas, he helped to create the kind of future that we now regard as the real world. That's important for us to be thinking about. And some of us with short attention spans who believe the AOC nonsense that the Earth is coming to a fiery end in 12 years, if it is, then God be praised, because as a Christian, I believe it only happens at a time of his choosing. We're not going to speed it up. We're not going to slow it down. Except by God's grace, the world does not support life. We hang in this delicate balance. We are here. If you can see that, we are here. I'm wearing one of my favorite t-shirts to watch this, because I was expecting to hear a lot of very interesting, highfalutin, fantastical ideas being communicated. But we are here, but for the grace of God, we're another lifeless planet in the galaxy. God created the conditions and sustains the conditions which support human life for his purposes, for his glory, for his name's sake. Let's hear what else Mr. Clarke has to say here.
You know, when you buy the 2 or 3 pounds of wood pulp, which is the daily newspaper, and incidentally, this is going to save whole forests for posterity, because the newspaper is on the way out, and we're not going to ship all this tons and tons of paper around when all we need is information.
Well, if we have face-to-face communications from our home, does this clue in with your slogan, commute? Don't commute, communicate?
Yes, and we are moving slowly, perhaps too slowly, towards this kind of world. And this is the way we're going to solve the traffic problem, ultimately, not by covering the world with concrete, but by getting rid of the traffic. And in the world of the future, travel will be for pleasure, not necessity.
And how will this sort of communication and travel for pleasure affect our social lives, do you think? In terms of, say, time zones?
Well, it's going to affect our social lives in many ways, as much as the automobile has done in the past, in many ways negatively, as much as the telephone has done in the past. You mentioned time zones, which are of concern in a country like the United States already, where you telephone from one coast to the other and your friends may be asleep or they will wake you up in the middle of the night. But in the global village of the future, it'll be like living in one small town where at any time about 1/3 of your friends are asleep, but you won't even know which third. So we may have to abolish time zones completely and all go on the common time, same time for everybody.
Okay. Think about how fluid time is now. In that, if I record this video on August 29th, 2021, you can watch this conceivably, possibly, supposing the world stands for longer than 12 years, you can watch this video 45 years from now. Imagine that. Just like we're watching his video from 45 years ago, it's conceivable you might be watching this video 45 years from now. I'm much less well-dressed than Mr. Clarke was 45 years ago. Part of that is a sign of our times as well. Part of that is a consequence of being able to telecommute, being able to sit in the comfort of my own home and travel all over the world, see images from Afghanistan, to see the debacle of U.S. withdrawal, China rushing in, Maybe you will watch this with an auto-translate that Google's facilitated using quantum computing. You'll listen to this in Mandarin Chinese, for all I know, in 45 years. But space and time have suddenly become much more fluid concepts because we can record these images and we can send them to one another, and we can watch and listen to these images and these sound bites from anywhere we have a decent internet connection and a decent computer or a decent smartphone or a decent smart television. And so far, he's right on. He's right on. The time zones thing, that might have been a hit and a miss, a swing and a miss, as far as whether we're going to abolish time zones, but who knows? Who knows? If Greenwich Standard Time suddenly becomes the only time zone and everything else is just standardized to that, what's the difference? But we do know that all of our devices can sync up. If they're smart devices connected to the internet, we can sync up the time, and all of our devices suddenly show the same time. We just do a couple of clicks, 2 or 3 clicks, and we can set our time to standard time, a kind of global time zone if we choose. It's a very different world, especially in the midst of the COVID pandemic, if you want to call it that, whatever this is, plandemic, if you will, if you're more conspiracy minded. Telecommuting, working from home, teleconferencing, all of that makes possible on a faster timeline what he was conceiving of 45 years ago. It was a gleam in the eye then. Now it is attainable, and I think it is being attained before our very eyes.
Which will cause all sorts of problems.
When you first came up with the concept of communication satellites, didn't many scientists think this was a pretty far out and unreasonable idea?
Well, it was far out. It was 36,000 kilometers out. But no, not at that time. This was 1945, and the V2 rockets had arrived, and when my paper was published, the atomic bomb had been dropped. So at that time, people were prepared to accept almost anything. And I don't remember any negative criticisms. In fact, I don't remember any comments at all, to tell the truth. But there's certainly no feeling this was nonsense. And 10 years before, there would have been, but 1945, no.
What do you see ahead in terms of, really far ahead in terms of communications?
Well, the thing that really interests me isn't so much human communications, but communications with other intelligences elsewhere. This is the biggest unknown. Of course, one of the most exciting prospects. Will we ever pick up signals from space, radio signals or any other kind of signal? Everybody feels sure there must be all sorts of higher civilizations out there with tremendous technological capabilities. And we ought to be able to pick up their signals, even if they're not beamed at us. They must have tremendous powers to play with. And I hope that I live to see the first reception of a signal from outer space.
Do you think that you will? Do you think it's that close?
It could happen tomorrow. Nobody knows. You see, it could happen tomorrow. It might be in the evening papers right now that someone has picked up the first signal. There have been several false alarms, and people have thought they had done this. The pulsars, the people who found the pulsars first, these very rhythmic signals, yes. They thought they might be artificial.
Okay, here's where I get weird. If Arthur C. Clarke can get weird 45 years ago, I think I can get a little bit weirder 45 years on in the present. Modern science is predicated on this idea that we should explain all phenomena without including the possibility of God causing things to happen. From an origin story standpoint, for the universe, modern science subscribes, by and large, in the mainstay, to the idea of uncaused, natural, random events, causes. The Big Bang is preferred over God said, in the beginning, God. The Big Bang is preferred over in the beginning, God. Now, there's two possibilities. These are mutually exclusive, and even though there's a wide spectrum of people trying to mix and match and have some of one and some of the other, if we allow for two possibilities, one, the Big Bang, uncaused cause being the Big Bang, or an eternal universe, and no God, entirely naturalistic, entirely materialistic, then what I'm about to say is a whole lot of fluff and nonsense and a waste of your time. And presumably, if we encounter alien civilizations, as he's talking about, as he's describing, communicating with other species, interplanetary, intergalactic, maybe, species, those species may be more advanced than we are. They may teach us a thing or two. We may be destroyed by them, as the subject of many science fiction novels and movies and TV shows have explored. They may be benevolent. They may be malevolent. They may want to destroy us and wipe us off the face of the planet. They may want to take us under their wing, like the Vulcans. Time will tell if we encounter any such civilization, what their motives are, what their paradigm is, what their interest is in us, if they have any interest. Now, there certainly seems to be more evidence in recent years, more concrete admissions from the powers that be, less denial, more acceptance, more at least passive admission that there are things flying in our skies that we cannot identify. We don't know who they belong to, where they came from, why they're there, what they're doing. They don't belong to us, supposedly, but we don't know who they do belong to and what they're doing here. And at some point, maybe, probably, we find out the answer to those questions, for better or worse. He's excited about it, so he has a presumption that this will be a good thing. Part of that presumption is related to Gene Roddenberry's exploration of these concepts in the Star Trek series. The Star Trek TV series is predicated on a certain worldview, which has a lot in common with the utopian science fiction which preceded World War I and World War II. And that presumption is predicated on the idea that evolution is the cause, is the driving force behind progress. Progress, or progress if you will, but progression comes from progress. Now, if progress is the result of evolution and random mutations include a whole lot of non-beneficial changes, but every now and then, if given enough time, beneficial mutations, and that the beneficial mutations win out over the non-beneficial, harmful, or benign mutations, then the presumption is that a more advanced civilization will have good motives, and they will teach us not only things from a technological standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, but also from a moral standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint. We will have a enlightening effect on our species with our encounters with these beings from elsewhere. There's a whole lot of metaphysics that goes into the seemingly, at first blush, materialistic, naturalistic, scientific presuppositions, assumptions here. If they're correct, then what I'm going to say just now, right now, is a lot of fluff and nonsense, irrelevant, and hocus pocus. Forget about it. As Arthur C. Clarke says, any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And I am a holdover from a reptile-brained, primitive caveman just trying to survive and keep Ugalug over there from bashing me over the head with a club and running off with my wife and stealing my fire and taking my zebra and setting up shop in my cave. But there's another possibility. And it has a whole lot to do with the origins of science in Western civilization, in the Judeo-Christian conviction that truth is transcendent, that morality and physical laws of the universe come from God, that God is the creator. In the biblical worldview, the days of Noah tell us something about how the last days of this earth, before it passes away and is replaced with a new heavens and a new earth, will be. In the days of Noah, Genesis 6 tells us that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took any of them that they would for wives. They had children with them, and these children were giants, mighty men of renown, heroes, and, if you will, monsters. Heroes and monsters. These were the gods of antiquity. These were the spirits and the deities and the monsters we read about in Greek mythology, in Norse mythology, in Egyptian mythology, in Sumerian and Babylonian mythology, in Chinese mythology, in all the mythologies. The origin story for a lot of these ancient mythologies is that a god had relations with a woman, and the offspring was a demigod, and that demigod was the first line progenitor of kings, emperors, lawmakers, builders of civilization. But also, with that, God sends a flood in Genesis, and he spares one man and his family on the ark, and that man believes in the one true God and does not worship false gods, and he doesn't give his daughters to be their wives, and he doesn't obey them and worship them as all of the rest of humanity does. He believes in the one true God. Now, if that view is correct, God spoke. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if the biblical narrative is true, then what Arthur C. Clarke is describing here, communicating with beings from elsewhere, has one of two outcomes. One of those outcomes is we're communicating with beings which are loyal to God, which serve God faithfully. The other possibility is we're communicating with beings which have rebelled against God, which are at war with God, which seek to lure the majority of humanity into a joint alliance against God and the people of God and the children of God, and make war on the children of God. And if that is correct, then all of this smiling optimism about making contact with these beings is evidence of folly. However smart someone might be to make satellites, communication satellites, which allow us to communicate across the globe instantaneously or nearly instantaneously, to go and plant flags on the moon or travel to Mars and set up colonies there, or mine asteroid belts, or what have you, fill in the blank. It is going to a dark place. And just like the unbridled optimism which preceded World War I did not take into account a corrupt calculation with regards to the value of human life, how horrifying atomic weaponry might be in destroying entire cities of men, women, and children indiscriminately. So also this optimism from 1976, which is still with us in 2021, although you have to squint to see it sometimes with all of this doom and gloom about climate change. I would predict that in the next 45 years, if not sooner, you have claims made to communication with these beings who are showing us a better way to be, showing us that they actually are the heroes of the story, and that the God of the Bible is the villain, and we should all join forces against him, make war against him and his saints and the angels. That might seem far-fetched, but that just happens to be my worldview, my cosmology, my conception of space, time, technology, human nature, history, and the future. Just a little food for thought there. Let's hear the last minute and 10 seconds of what Arthur C. Clarke has to say. We'll let him finish it out.
This is very exciting. You also talk about a wristwatch.
A wristwatch radio. Well, Dick
yes,
Tracy, of course,
telephone.
had this many years ago, and the wristwatch telephone will be technologically feasible very soon. And so the telephone will no longer be sort of fixed in one place. It will be completely mobile. And this would again restructure society, and of course it has disadvantages as well as advantages. It means that anyone can get at you anytime you like, and of course you could switch off the calling sign, but then calling signal, but then you might have to explain later why it was switched off. But the advantages are so great. The number of thousands of lives would be saved every year by such a thing, and it seems to me to override almost all other considerations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clarke. We've been speaking with Arthur Clarke, the man behind the communications satellite. This is Pat McCallum for AT&T Monitor.
Methinks that we ought to be a bit more humble and a whole lot less godless, because however much we know, however much we think we understand, however much we revel in saying we can figure out the location of planets we cannot see, stars we cannot see, from looking at wobble, things like that. We can get the most powerful telescopes and microscopes, see far and wide and also close in and in detail. However much knowledge increases, we ought to be very careful that we don't conflate knowledge with wisdom and understanding. As a Bible-believing Christian, and when I say that, I mean a Christian who believes that God's Word is inerrant, inspired, it is the true Word from the Creator of the universe. I don't believe that old things are necessarily inferior to new things, and I also believe that there is no new thing under the sun. We do well to be informed in our predictions for the future, our enthusiasm for the future, by what has gone before, and to maybe take a look at the Tower of Babel and God confusing the language and why he does that. If man succeeds in this, nothing will be impossible for him. Is that preferable? Is it preferable that nothing be impossible from a practical standpoint, from a pragmatic standpoint? Is that preferable to knowing, loving, and serving the one true God? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? If there's a much brighter future in the new heavens and the new earth, that is not to say we should forsake all science, but it is to say that science done right, done well, done wisely, takes into account the fear of the Lord. Without it, you have not even the beginning of wisdom. You have a lot of people thinking themselves wise and actually becoming very foolish, very puffed up, very conceited. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty look before fall. May it not be said of us that we are conceited. We should have humility, not just from a material standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint. Moreover, have that be upstream of our humility from a material standpoint. Richard Dawkins' loftiness aside, we may be able to explain phenomena without God, but are we explaining it rightly? Do we understand so much as we claim to be able to describe? We should distinguish between those things. But what did I miss? Did I miss the whole point, do you think? Did I teach you something? Did I provoke a string of thought which might be useful to you? Please leave a comment down below. Tell me if you think I'm way off base. Tell me if you think I'm quite right. Ask me some questions. Give me some suggestions for future reaction videos to do. Again, hit like if you liked this video, if it was thought-provoking to you. Don't hit dislike. Why would you dislike this video? You loved it. Admit it. You know it. I know it. We all know it. Hit subscribe. Leave a comment. Hit like. That's all I've got for this episode. As always, I'm Garrett Ashley Mullet. I want to talk about everything. That happens to include, in this case, Arthur C. Clarke interviews from 45 years ago. As always, thank you for listening. Until next time, God bless.